I think one of the biggest challenges in a new or small growing company is determining who does what and how you get things done through people outside of, getting money and figuring out what your product or service offering even is. How do you get all of this stuff moved forward through human resources and people and talent? And, you'll hear us talk a lot about job descriptions. So, we'll start saying, who do you need? What are they going to do? What are the areas of responsibility? What are the skills and experience that somebody who's going to be able to deliver this, doing whatever that is for you, needs to have to hit the ground and really be successful? And then, even further detailed of that becomes, how does everybody work together in the team? And that's where RACI comes in. So RACI stands for responsible, accountable, consulted. I use the word collaborator for that C, and then informed. So those are 4 kind of ways someone might participate in a deliverable. So an example could be delivering social media marketing. Maybe that's the deliverable you're looking at. And within that deliverable, who is responsible, meaning who's responsible for certain work pieces of that deliverable, who's ultimately accountable. So who is going to be the person that at the end of the day, it's their name attached to this deliverable, and they hold the team accountable or keep it moving forward. Who's a collaborator? So who's maybe not on the team, but you need some information from, and you need to connect in with or consult with. And then who needs to be informed along the way? Who are the stakeholders in addition to the delivery team? So you can see why I say it gets a little bit in the weeds. But that's really kind of the gist of what a RACI is. So I didn't create any kind of slides, but I've got an example I can share with you all. I'll start with the example and kind of share my screen, and then maybe we can each, if you guys have any examples within your organizations of deliverables you're trying to figure out, who's responsible for it, who's accountable, all of those things. So this is more of an example of the roles within the organization, or just defining the roles. So you have the visionary. Usually the visionary is your CEO. For you guys, that might be a founder. You've got an integrator. This is someone who operationalizes whatever work needs to be done or figures out how it all kind of happens. You usually have some sort of sales and marketing that you're thinking through, and deliverables attached to either business development or marketing. And then you've got probably technology vertical, building either a tech product or your tech stack in your operations. And then whatever your service, maybe you have a service vertical. This example shows a marketing agency. And so their service vertical is also marketing. But whatever that might be in how clients are interfacing with either your service or product, and who delivers on that interface. And then you've got general business administration. You've got financials, HR, potentially other administrative and business office duties. For many small companies and startups, this is like one person wearing all of those hats and or outsourced. But these are all kind of areas as you're developing an organization, not just a product, but an organization, you're thinking about where are the verticals or areas that things need to be delivered and accounted for. And then these can break down into what's called a RACI. And this looks like scary and complicated, and it kind of is. And I think that this is probably an example of bigger than where you need to go, but you can see, hopefully see some of the thought work around this concept. So you've got your verticals, or kind of what's being done up here at the top. You've got areas of focus, so new business, client management, Project strategy is something that needs to be delivered on. Client discovery needs to be delivered on for this marketing agency. There's some analysis that needs to happen. Brand comms, technology direction, and then some leadership responsibilities and areas to look at. And in that, you're then kind of saying, in these areas, who's participating in the work, who's responsible, who's accountable at the end of the day, who's really holding everything to account, and then who is collaborated with or coordinated with. And then who just needs to be informed. And this organization kind of broke it down in the way you see here. Again, really in the weeds, but it gives you guys some idea of how people think through what work they need to get done, and then how they distribute that work amongst the team. So I think what I'll do now right now, and maybe we can apply a concept of a RACI to it in kind of a lighter, less complicated way. But anybody on the call thinking through a deliverable and how the team's going to get it done?
So how we started, it was like 3 founders. So basically me, I'm the product officer. We had the CEO, who was, the idea of the project, and also like what has everything been written in the application that we have created, and so on and so on. And our business angel, who came to us with the financial support to grow, to create our project, create application, and create our team, so on and so on. So when we first started, and the concept that has been written, just only 3 of us to understand what kind of idea will be, what kind of content we want to see in our application. And the first hire that we actually made, it was a development team from the outsource, because we had in our CEO the qualifications of PhD in psychology, knowing what we're talking about emotional intelligence. She has the required qualification to write unique pieces and create the content that we're already having in the application. And that development being outsourced because we're not tech savvy and we didn't know how to develop an application, how to create all of that. So we hired a team that will help us. And after that, when we started to form our internal team, we brought another content creator who has a psychology PhD. We brought our own designer who would take a lead in, creating designs for the application, for the presentation, for our website, and so on and so on. And then we top it up with the copywriter, like a CMM for the social medias that we started working on, and also targetologist who would launch our ads to Google Ads, Apple Search, and so on and so on. So that's kind of like the core team that we have created. And then we had some additional help, like of another designer that we bring into our team, additional team from different targetologists. But we had the core team right from the beginning, from 2 years when we have started. And so to have those qualifications that we understand that we have, that we need, that would like strengthen our position, but what we don't have, we just hired it from outsource to help initially. But then when we're getting more tech savvy, we want to bring in bring the in-house developers to have all done within our team.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's a really good example. So when you're creating, let's say, a technology product, your outsourced people can be part of your RACI as well. They're delivering on what needs to get done. Ultimately, though, who's accountable for all of it? That accountable person you probably want internal. But the responsible people, the people doing the work, can still be outsourced when you're really small and just getting going. And so you're looking at, some of your work product is creating your product, creating your app, developing it, content writing, all of those things you listed. Another piece is then marketing your app, finding clients, doing market research, buying ads, doing social media. Another work outcome could be hiring the team that's going to develop the app, or managing the outsourced team that's going to be developing the app. Those are all things that need to get done during a day that you're thinking through who's doing it and who's ultimately accountable for it. Those are the two big pieces. You could potentially have 3 of you and an advisory board, and you've got advisors in key subject matter areas where you know they're consultants or collaborators for you. And so you might plug them in on the C as the consultant for some of these things. So let's say you have an app that also needs subject matter expertise in psychology. You don't have a psychologist on the team, but you have this PhD that's on your advisory board. You know, you want to make sure that as you're rolling out the development of that app, there's some plug out to collaborate or consult with that subject matter expert as well. So that's sort of how you map out using all of your resources and all of the kind of talent around you, whether it's outsourced, internal, advisory, whatever that might be. Another example, you know, I've got a client who was growing pretty quickly, and they're developing diagnostic tools. And so there was a lot of really heavy lifting on the clinical research side that was pretty fast paced. They're going to outsource all of that. There's, you know, it's really episodic. It's not something they're going to need permanently on the team forever. And so that's an outsourced part of that delivery. But they needed to hire someone internally that could hold that outsourced team accountable. And so there were some project management elements they really needed to hire to internally, even though they were outsourcing a great deal of the other work, if that makes sense. So those are things to think about. At a really initial stage, one of the things I find that some organizations have the hardest time with is, what do I do here as a CEO or founder? What does that even mean? You'll find that I always use like the kitchen analogy, the too many cooks in a kitchen. You don't want everyone salting the soup and nobody's checking on the chicken cooking. And so you've got to make sure you guys are all talking to each other about, really at the end of the day, I own what piece of our business that I'm ultimately accountable for, and what piece are you ultimately accountable for. And so sometimes a really lighter RACI, or an exercise you can do with the RACI that's not as detailed as what I showed you guys, is to just say with the founding team, what am I accountable for? What are you accountable for? What am I responsible for? What do I add in terms of expertise that I can be consulted on in someone else's area of responsibility? And then what do I want to just know about or be informed of? And then what stakeholders do we have that we need to be reporting to and informing as we move forward and move work forward? Those are other things to think about.
So while we've got a very small team now, we have had larger team members in the past, and we're actually working with a lot of contractors. So there's that responsibility, but not the accountability. Mm-hmm. So even though we're really small, we're pretty process oriented, I think, because Gary and I spent a bunch of our career at Hewlett Packard, right? So, I mean, we had processes for everything. And so, you know, we try to be a little bit more lightweight and nimble with the company. But what happens is there will be consultants or contractors that Gary manages that are in his area of operation, and there'll be those that I manage. And so he's accountable, I'm accountable, even though the consultant might be responsible for the work and we're contracting for the work. And what we do is we try to put a contract together that has the objectives and the milestones or the results that are very clear. Like, I'm just looking at a contract, at a addendum to a potential contract now for an independent sales rep. And it's like, no, we're not going to just pay. We're not going to give you stock in the company for introductions, right? There's got to be results. And so it's, I think what's important is if you can articulate it and be really clear about the expectations for the responsible parties, it is still up to me in this particular case to be accountable for deciding to go forward with that rep or pulling the plug and saying too much work for, you know, what we're likely to get. If we are having this problem now, it's going to be no easier going forward, whatever. But I'm ultimately accountable for the results in this area, and Gary is ultimately accountable for the results in his area. And then that'll get parsed out further when we bring more people into the organization, right? So they will then manage their own contractors or have their own areas of responsibility or accountability. So for us, it hasn't mattered too much whether it's external or internal to us. We still have the same sort of outlines of managing by objectives and trying to be clear about what results are meaningful for us and measuring people on that.
Yep, that's a really great example. And I think the success there is that you guys decided, okay, this is my area of accountability. This is Gary's area of accountability. And so we manage all of those resources under that vertical.
And we talk about it quite a bit. The good news in our company, I guess, is that Gary and I don't have, well, there are some overlapping skills, but there's areas that he is, it's so clear that he's the right person for leading it. And there's areas that it's so clear that I should be leading it. So I suppose a lucky thing for us is we don't very often get into any fights over who should be accountable.
Right. Yeah. And I think that also speaks to something else about rounding out your leadership team. And so making sure that there's balances there when you're rounding out skill set and perspective and all of those things, so that it becomes clear who does what and why, and their best place to do it based on their skill set. And, one other thing I loved about what you said, Laura, is being really clear about what you then expect from the team. And so you'll see when I do any kind of job description exercises or job development exercises with you guys, it's not an HR document solely for me. It really is an expectation setting document. And so you're laying out skills, abilities, experience needed, what needs to get done, areas of responsibility, areas of accountability, areas of collaboration. And then I roll even that up further to, in the summary of the position, I love to include success in this position is, and the top 3 things that they really deliver on in that role. So you can really be really clear and direct about it. And if you are, you then can use that as a tool to set up expectation, set up training, set up evaluating and coaching. That document guides all of that if it's correctly outlined. Laura, anything you want to add?
No, just I really like the shared expectations comment. I was just thinking that's so important that I would almost think, I was thinking, gosh, that should be the title of the next job description is expectations, and getting to shared expectations, because that's where we can run into some of the problems if the assumptions are not mutually clear to the two parties. That's not just for startups, it's for any organization or even family members. Sometimes it's pretty helpful to have clear expectations.
Yep, absolutely. I love, I'm all for over communicating rather than under. If anyone ever works with me, you'll learn that. But, it's like, yep, let's talk about it. Then let's put it in writing, and then let's digest it and see if we're even defining these words in the same way. Because you could say, I hear you, this is what it means to me. And you guys might not even be speaking the same language. And so it's really important to have that as an expectation tool. And then as you're growing together, let's say, a year in, 6 months in, and you're doing some coaching or you're evaluating that work, you can then set some new goals and set some new expectations and up level from there. And so you're constantly kind of communicating about how you guys are sharing the work, how you guys are delivering on the work, and how you're splitting up the different responsibilities, even in a small team. And particularly in a small team, that's so important. You get going and you're wearing so many hats and you're so busy. Are you taking the time to coordinate and set expectations with each other and really making sure you're being as efficient as possible in splitting your time? I call it becoming small but mighty.
Was I think of RACI and some of these operating mechanisms as a system of how you execute once you have a annual plan and your priorities are clear. RACI is a great way to have that shared understanding of who's doing what, and it's a great visual communication tool also. So it's very clear to everybody who's collaborating on what and who owns what. But to the time comment, I think it goes hand in hand with a system that's often known as OKR, or depending on what you're using as your execution system, clear commitments that are time-based. I have this project, or Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so owns this project as part of their quarterly or yearly priority. There's a clear task associated with it. There is a clear date on when that's going to get completed, who owns it, and then who's supporting it. And a tracking mechanism with whatever suits your venture, whether it's weekly, bi-weekly, but everybody reviews it very quickly in a weekly meeting or a dedicated meeting to make sure everything's on track. People are calling in to see if help is needed. So you keep things moving on schedule.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you kind of even more broadly, I think that's great. It's both triggers and depending on your milestones or schedule for whatever piece of that puzzle you're talking about. And when you look at organizations as entities, if you're talking about startup to mature organizations, those check-ins lengthen. It's kind of the theory of relativity, right? When you're younger as an organization or as a human, everything feels big and it's going really pretty, there's a lot happening in those first few years. And then as you get older, there's some stability there or a maturity in the organization. Size of organization can dictate that too, size of your role or what you're getting done, but it's all just depends. And for personal development, even if you're developing people under you, it really depends on where they're at in relation to their role in the organization. So I'm not someone who is a standard, like every year you do an evaluation. It really depends on what needs to get done and be developed in that person. And so you may check in much more frequently than annually and to keep things moving forward and keep someone developing.
Yeah, and I think one, simple operating mechanism that many companies and startups have are one-on-ones, just making sure that, between your partner, coach, supervisor, however you have the culture in your team, you have bi-weekly check-ins with your peers as well as your team members and your boss. I think that really helps keep things very fluid and open and transparent.
Absolutely. I love one-on-ones. And I think when you talk about intentional culture, a culture of feedback is an intention you can have.
Yeah.
And so when you're creating a culture of feedback, it doesn't just mean positive feedback. It means everybody's comfortable readjusting, evaluating, and talking through some of these coordinations that we all have to figure out as we keep moving at, a huge fast pace in a startup. And so creating that culture of feedback can be one-on-ones. It can be walking through RACIs as you have a new deliverable. It can be coaching sessions. It can be stay interviews is something, where if you have a cadence of one-on-ones, I'm now helping some employers use some of those one-on-ones to find out more about how their employees are feeling in their role and where else they might be looking in this time of reshuffle and resignation. And so there's all kinds of ways. RACI is one of the tools, one-on-ones, ongoing evaluation, coaching, where you can really intentionally create a culture of feedback in your organization. And that communication sounds like Laura does that very naturally with her team, keeps you guys moving forward together.
This is David. Hi, how's it going, everyone? Great information. Well, our company is, I guess, in a way a bit similar to the previous, in where we've had some growth and kind of balloon up and then back down, and we're trying to balloon up again. But with that, we've gone through product cycles and services cycles a little more formally in our initial rollout, and we've scaled back and are focusing mostly on intellectual property and building out intellectual property. So the real milestones we're looking for at the moment are a handful of products that are geared to commercialize, as well as licensing opportunities and proof of concepts within a certain domain. So what we're really looking at right now is pretty focused on really technical side, which Mark, you've everybody's met here. He's our formerly my chief scientific officer, and now more as an advisory role until things kind of roll out later. And so he's geared or tasked with really packaging our concepts and rolling them either into grants or presenting to companies that are interested in licensing opportunities, as well as initial, we'll call it development of our products that are geared to commercialize. And I'm tasked with a lot of the logistics on the business side, with finance and minimal marketing, if any. To be honest, right now, we haven't really. We'll say we're flying under the radar right now. We're kind of stealth mode still, but we have the few groups that we've been speaking with are pretty big players in the field and are very interested in what we have to a potential for a collaboration. So I'm very picky in the time that we spend with our go-to-market strategy, and basically my responsibilities are really focused on really more the business dev side of things and pulling in money and legal. And with IP, there's a lot of patent logistics that go into it that is not trivial. We're past we're in 5 different countries right now in prosecution stage. Actually, one's been approved. So that's a team in and of itself, to be honest, to try and take care of patent prosecutions. And if you don't have a team, then I hope you have somebody that is at least familiar with how to communicate with foreign associates, because it is a bit of it's time. It's a lot of time and a lot of legal that goes into that. So between the few of us, we're managing. And I have recently reached out to some more advisory members to help support really what I would consider are urgent needs. And that is how I'm allocating the responsibility, so that neither Mark or myself are too overwhelmed. And we have clear milestones set between both of us that need to be executed efficiently in order for us to go to the next stage. So that's how we're kind of doing it. It's very atypical, and certainly not what we went through during the first round of a more, I'll call it, conventional rollout, where we did have a number of products and very clear targets as far as creating your portfolio and cold calling clients, or going to seminars and kind of going to outreach for new leads and these types of things. So I want to say what we're doing now, there probably, if there is a handbook for it, I haven't seen it, but it's more, we're being creative, I guess is one way to put it. But with the umbrella that there are tasks and responsibilities that have to be clearly defined. We can't afford any miscommunication, and there has to be execution. And with that said, with the small group, you just have to have trust in that group, because really if any one of us drops the ball, it could lead to severe impact. And we both have a large stake in what we've been and building here. So we trust each other. And with that, we allow each other the freedom to execute, and we do meet regularly to follow up on these milestones. So I guess that's our story. And I certainly like the way you've presented in that PowerPoint format, how to break out these corporate divisions and allocation of responsibilities. And that's something that I would like to incorporate into our build moving forward.
Yeah. And it sounds like even though you have changed what you're delivering, what you're doing. You're getting really creative in how you're leveraging IP now versus what you were doing before. You still have created these verticals of accountability underneath each founder. And that's something that can be duplicated even if your business pivots. You then say, okay, what am I going to run forward? And what are you going to run forward? What's your position on the team, or what plays are you calling? If I use a sports analogy, which could be a totally wrong way to use it because I'm not a sports person, but you know, you want to know what you're ultimately responsible for. And you bring up another good point, David, in founders. So when you're at the top of the organization, who holds you accountable? So you've got who you're holding accountable, but where are you accountable to? And that could be a board. It could be to each other. Maybe in your work deliverables or your work verticals, David, you need to keep your co-founder informed. They're the eye on the RACI, or your board, depending. And there's some ways that you guys can work out between yourselves that you motivate and hold to account each other so that you're moving forward at the same time. There's, you know, it's all a big Venn diagram of collaboration or informing or, you know, all of those things in each thing that you do. And so even when you're being creative with how you're executing your business, even when you pivot it, it's still the same kind of determination of verticals of accountability and how you manage from there.
Yeah, that's spot on. And one thing I would like to add is, and going back to the more conventional route, when we did have a bigger team and we're kind of moving forward in a methodical way, when we came to there were circumstances or points where certain employees or consultants or contractors weren't performing, right? And you get to a point where there's a cycle of, we'll call it retraining, that needs to be implemented at a certain level in order to meet expectations. Now, I guess I'm curious how this RACI diagram would go into addressing issues of non-performance, and we'll call it, for lack of a better term, how many chances are we going to give somebody before we move on?
Yeah, you know, the RACI really lays out how the work's getting done. And then within that, the person who is accountable for the work needs to determine how then they hold to account what's being done. And so setting KPIs, setting milestones, goals, timelines, measuring results, all of those things are really clear. And I think if you start with a clear expectation set at the front end, it's much easier than to manage to that really clearly. You guys are already, they know what they're expected to do. You've set the timeline. And then if it's not happening, you have really clear reason to come together and talk about it. And it might not be performance. It could be the expectation you set wasn't reasonable. The timeline you set wasn't reasonable. It could be a vendor that's getting in the way. But again, if you're creating that culture of feedback and you're constantly kind of measuring to and moving forward together, you can dig that out.
Yeah, that's a great point. Because I think one of the worst things, especially early stage companies, can do is let somebody go too early when talent is so hard to get, and investment in training is, well, it's critical in the early stage for sure. But there are points, and I guess I kept it kind of a rule of thumb, is I usually give people 3 cycles, which is, okay, they haven't met expectations. We'll sit down, we'll have a meeting, we'll retrain, and we'll evaluate. And we'll do that for another 2 cycles until that's just my kind of cutoff. But I guess there's no real rule of thumb. However, I do think it's important to emphasize not letting people go too early, evaluating your investment in talent or consultants even, and making a good decision on how to recoup or move on.
Yeah, I'll tell you, one of the hardest things still for me, and I'm a good coach, but you know, I'm still sometimes a player and not the best player in my own business, right? But you've got to look at, you know, you're weighing that, like, how big is the learning curve in coming into my business? You know, if it's a startup, it might be a pretty big learning curve because there's all this stuff you guys are learning together, and it's atypical usually in the roles people are playing. And so how much grace and time do I give to getting traction in this role? And how much am I going to have to reinvest in retraining that? How much do I value the learning in the mistakes that were made? Because sometimes people who make mistakes have done a lot of learning with you and maybe are even better suited to stay with you, depending on that mistake and who they are and what they're doing otherwise. You want to jump in, Shefali?
Yeah, I had one point of guidance I wanted to offer in terms of, managing expectations and evaluations. I'd say as a manager or founder CEO, I think it is your responsibility to really imagine the outcome you are looking for from your team and your employees, and helping them, envision that outcome, making it very, very specific so it's tangible, so that at the end of the month or at the end of that timeline, there's no ambiguity, or there's very little ambiguity on what was expected. I think the better you think through that outcome and make it very specific, i.e. a report or, a plan, or a very specific deliverable, the easier it is to have that feedback discussion and evaluate the performance.
Yep. Yeah. And I always think of there's the adage like hire slow, fire fast. And then I say, in this economy, what? You can't hire slow and talent's tight, right? And so it really, I changed that a little bit to say hire decisively. So what Shefali's talking about is not just, that's applied to when someone's working for you, but you can even roll that all the way back to the thought work you're doing before you even flesh out the role. So that you really know what needs to get delivered there and the skills and experience to hit the ground running in that. So when you're vetting candidates and potential hires, you can be really decisive of whether or not they have that and whether or not they can hit the ground or do what you need them to do. So it flows throughout the full process from beginning to end. And it's guided by, like Shefali said, the founder really being able to vision what's getting delivered at the end of the day. I know, Anthony, you popped on the screen for a little bit. Anything you wanted to add?
Just that, yeah, I've had a company running for about 14 months, and we had 5 core staff to start with, but now we've taken on 4 new staff, and we have a combination of employees and subcontractors. So I'm just thinking, I'm thinking forward about how to scale the business. And just to give you a brief introduction, we're a data science company, and we analyze data for medical researchers, and we have our own proprietary technology to do that. And so our work is very labor intensive because we have to analyze the data, it's time consuming. And so, as we scale to a large number of customers, at the moment, I'm from Australia, so I've been hiring people in Australia to do the work. And the advantage of that is the government shut the borders during COVID, the universities went broke. So there's actually a pretty good talent pool in Australia looking for employment. And in contrast to the US, there's no big industry players in Australia. So most scientists work in academia, or they leave academia once they sort of lose their academic position. So I've got this whole pipeline of talent based in Australia, but hiring people is expensive. And so it's more cost effective for me to get subcontractors. But then the issue is, how do I control the quality of the work, and how do I build a team, which is a combination of core staff versus contractors, and have everyone work together in a good culture. So that's what I'm sort of thinking about at the moment.
Yeah, and that might be when you're thinking through your RACI, all of those people who you're willing to subcontract probably shouldn't be people that fall in the A category. So when you're saying, okay, who do I need on the team permanently versus who can I subcontract, those people who are really accountable to the mission and service outcomes of the company maybe should still be hires.
Yeah.
And then subcontracting, then what are those responsibilities or deliverables that I can manage as a subcontractor? Because that's the other thing. And I don't know I'm not a lawyer in any country, but I don't know the laws around contracting in Australia, but I know in the US, there's some really clear ways that they start to measure whether they're really a contractor or not. And the US gets kind of tight on who you can call a contractor. That's a whole history that comes with health insurance debate way back in the Obama days. But the federal government started to really say, hey, you're offloading all of these employees into contractor status. Are you treating them like contractors? Are they really contractors? And so that kind of dictates your ability to manage them as well, and then can help you think through the work they should have on their plate versus who employees can have on their plate.
I guess the other issue is as we grow, we'll have clients all around the world, and we're analyzing medical research data. And often for privacy reasons, the data has to stay in the country of origin. So typically US data would analyze in the US, European data would analyze in Europe. So I'm going to have to build a network of subcontractors all around the world, and everyone's going to be in different time zones. So this is just something that I'm sort of thinking about. And I just wondered if you have any thoughts about that. Privacy.
That sounds really complex.
Yeah.
And
especially Europe. Europe has very strict laws on DNA sequencing data and protecting people's privacy, more stricter than
Yeah, I think, and Europe's leading data laws in a lot of ways all over, right? So, are there people that need to be on your team and ultimately accountable that then manage those subcontractors that are based in those countries? Those are things you need to think through. Yeah.
Probably
Yep. Exactly. Districts, regions, areas, whatever you want to call them.
Okay.
And then what is that skill set needed? And are you, are the people that are employees really managing contractors? Is that their skill set? Or is their skill set data analytics? Maybe it's not data analytics. Maybe it's managing contractors. Maybe their skill set is people management and operations in their country that they're stationed in. And then the skill set of your contractors is just that deliverable on the data.
Working on our resources. I know you heard me, if you've been on anything, you've heard me talk about this forever, but Rita and Helga made it so we're actually getting there. So our SMEs and MIRs, our subject matter experts and mentors and residents will get a soft rollout in the next couple of weeks, and then our companies will have access to that. So I'm still gathering all the templates so we can put them up, but excited about that. So that should help everybody with the access to templates and all the sessions that we do. It's our knowledge database coordinated with the roadmap. So something more to look forward to. Again, Devon, thank